Hi friends and welcome to a story we call The Joy of an Autumn Vegetable Garden. The year is 2017, but it really can be a story from any year, and our space measures 40 feet by 40 feet or 1,600 square feet, but any size space will do. We like to tell people how big our garden is because it's similar in size to many people's front or backyards, where we feel they have the opportunity to grow food instead of lawns. In this video, you'll spend time with our two pygmy goats, Alice and Charlotte, and our four insect-eating and egg-laying hens. In this fall season, we cover a lot of space and time, and we don't want to rush the story. So we invite you to relax, take a few deep rhythmic breaths, and settle in for the show. We'll learn by directly observing that which goes on in the garden, and the knowledge is reinforced by books we read this fall. Masanobu Fukuoka teaches us about do-nothing farming, and Alan Chadwick teaches about the biodynamic French intensive system. And for all their contrasts, they're more similar than they are different, and together we form our own hybrid style of gardening. We start the season with a celebration of friends and family at our 4th annual party. We typically hold this gathering midsummer, but this year we held it 2 days after the autumn equinox. One of the highlights for us at this party, the powdered sugar on the cake you might say, is being able to give our friends and family garden tours. We love to share the joy of growing food and introducing people to new and unique heirloom varieties, or letting the teenagers pick incredibly hot peppers to bring to school. Of course, we warn them to use them responsibly, but all of this is a great education for everybody involved, including ourselves. It's important for all of us to become connected with our food and how it's grown, because nowadays, unfortunately, deception has become commonplace, almost institutionalized in the food system. There's no question the produce from our garden is of high quality. So going out to harvest some fresh vegetables early in the morning with the hum of a freeway off in the distance is a nice relaxing way to start each day. We pull back the bird nets that protect the tender greens and start our harvest. These are a couple different kinds of radish, and we sowed this bed by seed at the same time we also sowed carrots. The radish mature quickly, and as we pull them, it makes room for the growing carrots. One row over, I have 2 different beds, each with a different lettuce mix. This is the spicier blend that I call Biodynamic Jack's Lettuce Blend because the seeds were given to me by a friend and mentor, who I'll introduce you to later. The second bed's mix is more mild, and I got the seeds from my neighbors who scored them on a trip to Europe. Radish top greens are full of vitamins and minerals. They have antioxidants and fiber. But with so much delicious lettuce, truth be told, we only eat a few of those radish tops, and the majority of them go to our hens. You couldn't buy a more fresh or delicious salad in any restaurant or market, and we had enough radishes to preserve some by fermenting and pickling others with jalapenos. One of the most clear indicators that a crop is ready for harvest is when those critters that we consider to be pests start to eat it. We grew 2 varieties of corn this year. Both are popping or grinding corn, so ideally you want to let them dry out on the stalks. But since our local rat community was aware that the corn was ready for harvest, we had to balance picking them before the rodents and the corn's full maturity. And so the garden teaches us to share, and we're reminded of a Native American saying, "One for the rat and one for the crow, one will rot and one will grow." We grew 4 rows of corn with 12 stalks in a row in our block. The 48 stalks were divided evenly amongst a variety called Glass Gem Here's a sneak peek at one of them before it dries out. And the other variety is a hybrid that we call the Rancho Rizo Red. We let the ears finish their drying process on outdoor shelves, but even here the rodents sometimes successfully chew through the screens to get at the corn. Some of the more heavily eaten ears are finished off by our hens under the watchful eye of Maggie. But nothing that comes out of the garden is wasted, and if the birds don't enjoy it, you can be sure our goats will. Here they munch on some of the leaves from the corn stalks. 2 of the 4 rows of corn were grown independently, but the other 2 were grown in a style of companion planting known as the Three Sisters. For thousands of years, Native American tribes have planted the Three Sisters together, acknowledging that they help one another grow. Pole beans climb up the corn stalks, wrapping them tightly together and putting nitrogen in the soil. And squash acts as a living mulch, suppressing weeds by shading with their big leaves and keeping the ground protected from the sun. We call this moment when we pull back the dried husks and expose the ears the reveal. Much like unwrapping nature's gifts, each one is beautiful to behold. This peaceful and gratifying moment is an opportunity to reflect on the growing process. In evaluating the differences between growing corn alone or in a Three Sisters companion planting, it wasn't clear if each of the individual crops thrived more than planting alone, but it was clear that my yield was much higher in one space with 3 different crops. We grew pole beans in the Three Sisters garden, but we also grew them independently on 2 different trellises. So with the suburban auditory symphony of birds chirping and garbage trucks squealing in the background, we do a morning harvest. The 4 heirloom varieties we planted are arid adapted and indigenous to the Southwest. Pole beans can be eaten in the flower stage as well as tender green beans, or you can let them dry on the vine, giving you a long season crop and one that stores well. This musical fruit's health benefits include fiber and protein and a variety of minerals and vitamins. Plus, beans are generally an affordable food, which is a different kind of joy unto itself. Our harvest takes place over several weeks and in stages, and the hot, dry winds of late fall help finish this crop to perfection, and we were left with nothing short of nature's jewels. Nothing goes to waste in a garden, and Alice and Charlotte enjoy crunching on some of the shells. And at the end of the season, everything else will go into the compost pile. Through late summer and all of fall, our hot pepper plants were giving us a bumper crop. We grew dozens of varieties, with many of them reaching into the hundreds of thousands or even million plus Scoville in heat. During late summer, we made hot sauces, 1 variety at a time, which we called single strains of pain. But for fall, we created a field blend sauce, which included ghost pepper, Carolina Reaper, Trinidad Scorpion Moruga 7-pot Douglas, Scorpion 7-pot Fatali, and white Peruvian habanero. We blended this mix of peppers with quality sea salt, homegrown garlic, and white and apple cider vinegar. We cooked down this devilish concoction on our outside barbecue, because to do so inside would have been cruel and unusual to everyone. Once thoroughly boiled, this brew went into 50 milliliter miniature alcohol size bottles. The perfect size for sharing with friends and family, since just a few drops goes a long, long way. And of course we printed up our own cute little labels We called this batch Real Hot Sauce, and they make great gifts. It's another fun way to share the joy of growing food with people we care about. Say hello to one of our fall garden friends, Mrs. Spider. Most of the time she stood perfectly still in the center of her web, only moving when an insect got caught. She built her web between the Tulsi Kapoor and the eggplants, and we enjoyed checking on her each day. The aroma of freshly harvested Tulsi on a calm morning is to be savored. On a stake on the far right of our screen, you'll watch a bird land and chirp to announce his arrival. Just a few feet away, that large spider is at the center of that delicate web, hoping to catch some of the bees that are going from Tulsi flower to Tulsi flower. Our bird friend flies away satisfied, but the harvest dance continues. Tulsi is also known as holy basil and is considered one of the queens of Ayurvedic herbs. The crushed up flowers and leaves make a soothing tea that's known as an adaptogen. In years past we grew the hardy strain Kapoor, but this year we added Vana, Krishna, and Rama to the list. Each of the teas has a slightly unique flavor profile, but all are great to enjoy at the end of a long day. We grew quite a few other food and herb crops in the garden this season. Some successfully, and others had challenges. And there are times when those challenges are beyond the scope of our control or understanding. And so, like a smart investment portfolio, the garden teaches us the value of diversification. Saving seeds is a winning proposition on many levels. When you grow heirlooms and save the seeds, the next generation will grow true to the parent generation. So if you have a favorite crop, you can regrow it year after year, and good chance it'll become even more hardy as it gets adapted to your climate and soil. And as a seed saver, you can propagate traits that are important to you. Things like size, color, or early or late maturing. And we especially like saving seeds from unique or cross-pollinated plants, adding diversity to the garden. Of course, saving seeds from your own garden also saves you money, because you don't have to buy them from one season to the next. And there's nothing wrong with keeping a few extra bucks in your pocket. But this year, it was those 3 new strains of Tulsi that we really wanted to save seeds from, especially since they were so hard to germinate. So we patiently waited for the plants to go to flower. Here's Vana. Our pollinating friends the bees would visit each flower, dancing on the stamens and petals, and as they turned brown we would cut the flowers off and dry them in our shed. Krishna is the most purple of the holy basil strains, and its aroma and flavors hint of cloves. And with its small leaves and woody stems, Rama was the most difficult Tulsi for us to germinate. Once the mature Tulsi flowers were completely dry, we'd crush them up inside a tightly meshed strainer. The seeds are similar in size to poppy seeds, so they'd fall through the tight mesh, along with some of the smallest bits of crushed flour. So to separate the heavier seeds from the dried flower chaff, we'd use a technique called winnowing. By simply pouring out the mixed flour bits and seeds, the breeze blows away the lighter flour bits, and the seeds are left to fall into our pan. In addition to planting and harvesting, there are always various maintenance chores that you do around a garden, and for us this fall, the big project was finishing off a chicken coop so our birds would be warm when winter arrives. We believe that when your blessings overflow, you have a moral obligation to not only serve yourself and family, but serve others as well. And so we'd like to share with you one of those causes we feel good about supporting. Once a week, we have the pleasure of being volunteers at the farm at Malibu. It's easy to feel like a kid on your way to Disneyland. And as we arrive at this magic kingdom of ancient Chumash land, we remind ourselves we're guests and here to help a farmer. It's this lady in red, Carrie Clasby, known as the intuitive forager, who runs this farm. She's often out making produce deliveries to some of the finest hotels and restaurants in the area. And she also pays the bills here, which makes her the boss. As the curator of this property, she strives to make it a place of healing, and it's also a place where we learn a lot about ourselves and the land. The unique cast of characters that Carrie has assembled here help to define this place's collective soul, and together we work to grow nutritious foods in harmony with nature around us. Here Art and Israel are laying down irrigation tape for a new planting, soon to be followed by Dave in the green shirt. Dave is an agricultural consultant and his crew are responsible for most of the plantings here at the farm. But Dave teaches me very valuable lessons, many of which are about conventional farming. On this warm October day, Dave told us about how on some conventional farms, to bring down the pH level of the soil, they inject sulfuric acid into the irrigation lines, and then use an agricultural chemical called thiocal to add nutrients to the soil. These heavy-handed approaches exclude you from the organic certification and are a far cry from how we do things here. I'd like to introduce you to Farmer Jack, who knows how to tickle the earth with a feather to get desired effects.
All we really need, the word is homeopathy. And all we really need in this whole row was probably that.
Here Jack is showing our other regular volunteer and my new friend Dan how to use Dr. Pfeiffer's compost starter. The compost starter is a carefully curated collection of enzymes, fungi, and bacteria that not only break down organic material, making it more available for the next crop to grow, but add nutrients and vitality to the soil. So on this day, Jack watches while one of us spreads the compost starter in front of the tractor which tills in the previous crop of tomato vines. On this day in late October, with the hot Santa Ana winds blowing, we use the balance of the compost starter on this heap. This small long hill, called a windrow, has about 50 tons of organic material, including vegetable scraps from Carrie's produce delivery business in the farm, weeds, and old horse manure. Once decomposed, most farms would consider this great compost, but Jack refers to it as a holding pile, and he uses it as a supplemental ingredient to make his biodynamic compost. Here we have about 20 tons of organic dairy cow manure and many bales of organic alfalfa, and these are the primary ingredients to make that biodynamic compost. For over 40 years, Jack has been studying, making, and teaching the compost making process. So we were both excited and felt privileged on that November morning to start making that teaching pile.
So the dimensions of the biodynamic compost pile is approximately 9 feet wide, 5 feet high, and 15 feet long.
And on that foundation, we layer a pile which is big enough to give us a critical mass, heating up to the ideal temperature of 130 degrees. Jack uses organic alfalfa because the root system goes deep and pulls up different minerals from the soil in which it grows. And he teaches us that depending on whether or not it's the first cutting, which has more leaves, or the second or third, which is more stemmy, can affect the ratio of carbon to nitrogen.
You try to preserve your body and your movements.
Yes, sir.
See, that took 2 swipes where this would take maybe 2 or 3 shovelfuls. Right?
In addition to demonstrating technique, Jack explains why organic dairy cow manure is ideal for making biodynamic compost. And while we would have preferred to have fresh manure, it wasn't available at the time, so we learned to work with the ingredients that we have. The process is nothing short of alchemy, and the end product feeds our farm and garden soil, which in turn encourages healthy and nutrient-rich crops. We scrolled Jack's compost recipe for you here, but we're going to make a video documenting the entire process in detail. And for now, let's enjoy one step in the process.
Feathering. Feathering.
It eliminates the problems with the moisture, with the dryness. With the
Evenly distributes it.
It's unbelievable.
Okay, cool. Let's see it. And the key word that you're going to see as you watch him operate, finesse. This guy's got finesse with that bucket. He does. Yep.
Jack scoops up these few layers of the alfalfa, manure, and biodynamic compost starter and lifts them up to turn them. But first we're going to take a look. And keep in mind, if you're doing this at home, you can just use a pitchfork to turn your pile. So the 83-year young Jack moves some of that heavy alfalfa and manure to show us.
See why you do this. Yeah. Even with taking our time, there's still that bit of dry spot.
So what is here? It's 75% dead.
Right.
When the decomposition process begins and the pile heats up, dry spots would burn, so they're simply unacceptable. So as Jack feathers the material out of the bucket, it gives us an opportunity to add water, providing for even moisture throughout the mix.
A wet sponge.
Oh yeah. Bringing it out. That's dramatic.
It's exactly the moist you want.
Beautiful.
At the end of this physically demanding but gratifying day, we get the e-ticket ride in the back of Jack's pickup truck. We return each week to continue to build the pile, and often I leave with a souvenir of a couple bags of finished compost. The completed process will take about 9 months. The work is a meditation, and the finished product carries in it influences not only of the carefully selected ingredients, but also of those who made the pile, seen and unseen living organisms, and even the energy of Mother Earth, Father Time, and the stars and the moon. One of the guiding principles of all sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices, including biodynamics, is that we seek to reduce or eliminate waste and utilize those resources that are close to or on our own property. So after our goats get first shot at the kitchen scraps, and then the chickens get those leftovers, the balance will go into the compost pile. On our property, we don't have the organic dairy cow manure or organic alfalfa that farmer Jack had procured for the Malibu farm, but we use those ingredients we can obtain, where we're confident they're free of harmful chemicals and will add nutrient diversity to our blend. In autumn, leaves are abundant, so they're a readily available source for organic carbon. But be aware that a thick layer of leaves in your compost pile can create a mat which becomes difficult for water to penetrate. We like to mix our leaves with other ingredients to help water percolate. After each layer on our pile is evenly moistened, we like to add Dr. Pfeiffer's compost starter. This is one of several biodynamic signature ingredients, and I'd like to introduce you to one of ours. It's fresh seaweed, and we collected it from our local beaches. We know this seaweed comes from clean waters because they're the same beaches that we play, swim, surf, and paddleboard in. And the micronutrient profile that comes from aquatic plants adds diversity to our compost that terrestrial ingredients just can't provide. All of life on Earth is connected to the primordial ocean, so bringing a tangible life force from our nearby waters makes scientific, economic, and intuitive sense. Back home on terra firma, we also like to add the bedding from our chicken coop and our goat's pen into the compost pile. The straw and orchard grass adds carbon, and the manures add nitrogen to our mix. And to preserve the continuity of microorganisms, we add layers of our finished compost to the new heap, in much the same way you would if you were making kombucha or sourdough bread. Unfortunately, many commercially available soils and composts contain cheap ingredients like sawdust or sand, or worse yet, they can contain the waste products of confined animal feedlots. These manures may contain bioaccumulation of genetically modified foods, pesticides, antibiotics, and stress hormones. But since we're looking to maximize the nutritive quality of our compost, we avoid using any questionable ingredients. So we don't put any paper or cardboard into our compost pile over concerns about the glues and dyes that might be in it. This fall we did add, for our first time, biodynamic preparations of composted dandelion, chamomile, valerian, stinging nettle, oak bark, and yarrow. These ingredients work in much the same way that yeast will turn grape juice into wine. So instead of spending our hard-earned money on some inferior product, we get exercise, we enjoy the meditation, and we use the ingredients at home to create the best compost we can. We know we've spent quite a bit of time in this video discussing compost, but it's because it's such an important subject in growing food. We've only scratched the surface, and as said earlier, we'll make an entire video documenting Biodynamic Jack's compost making process. But there's one more thing you should know about making compost. Because the process is so fundamental to nutrient-dense foods and so obviously environmentally responsible, that mere mention of the subject will immediately catch the ears of your most discriminating peers. Even in a room full of Southern California vegans and yogis, the moment you start talking about the nutritive quality of different manures, you will either be thrust into center stage, or the room will get as quiet as a night on the prairie. In late November, we started to pull out our pepper plants, beginning with the sweet ones which had stopped producing. It had been 284 days since we first germinated the seeds in mid-February, and 188 days since we planted these peppers in late May. Periods of transition are powerful moments, and I take advantage of this opportunity to make both practical and spiritual observations. Empirically speaking, we make note of how deep and thick the roots penetrate the ground, the shape and color of the leaves, and the number of peppers that remain on the plant at this point in the season. This process is a moving meditation. It's an opportunity to eat the last peppers of the season, which are as special as the first ones. We feel a sense of gratitude for each plant and the food it provided. We feel that sense of connection, having eaten the food from that plant and assimilated it into our body. We are essentially one. As we hold that uprooted plant in our hands, in our mind we reassure it that it will be renewed. The goats will eat at the leaves, and the chickens will peck at its roots. It will join the compost pile with its other neighboring plants to be reassimilated, revitalized, and returned to the garden in a reincarnated form. One morning when I came out to the garden and looked at the web, the spider wasn't there. And for days her web remained, slowly falling apart, and I never saw her again. And I believe she found a nice male spider, mated, then ate him, and had babies of her own. And when the time is right, maybe we'll meet them. Before most plantings, we prepare the bed with one of our favorite tools, the broad fork. This allows us to open the earth up to air and water without being as pulverizing to soil structure as a tiller would be. After a pass, we'll water the bed thoroughly, spread some compost, and then rake smooth and level, water it again, and at last, we're ready for seeds. In this bed, I cast out some seeds of Texas white sweet onion that we grew out in our garden in a previous year. We also cast out Brunswick red onion seeds, which were purchased from a large and respected heirloom seed dealer. And on the western or most downslope part of this row, we planted some French red shallot bulbs, finally covering everything up with a light layer of Biodynamic Jack's compost. Now we just add water and let nature do its thing. A couple of weeks later, the Texas white sweet onions started to germinate, but the Brunswick never did. So we replanted the area to a variety of carrots, radishes, and cilantro. This fall we planted 4 varieties of garlic, 100 cloves in all. And we also planted a variety of the cruciferous vegetables, which are cold hardy, including Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, and others. But we're going to talk about our largest planting, half the garden, a little later on in this video. The night of December 3rd was a beautiful supermoon. In the moon's elliptical orbit around the Earth, a supermoon occurs when it's at its closest point to us, or perigee. For many thousands of years and across many different cultures, people have recognized that the moon has a profound influence on our crops. And interestingly, that morning we had our very first frost of the season, albeit a very light one. But the sequence of wild weather was just getting started, and warm, dry Santa Ana winds picked up fierce. Last winter's historic rainfall provided moisture to sprout even the deepest seeds, and our hills were covered in brush. So this combination of fuel and wind and low humidity sent up the red flag warnings. The predictable result was that fires began to erupt in Southern California, and within a 20-mile radius of our home, multiple fires were burning. This is all smoke in the air. Our home lies in what they refer to as a natural fire corridor as the flames race towards the ocean. Thankfully, our home and neighborhood were spared, and I got to spend some time with Jack on the farm, one-on-one, making compost. We got to talk about how the wind blew away that valuable topsoil, which Alan Chadwick refers to as the skin of the earth. And I realized that Masanobu's philosophy of keeping weeds in the ground help hold that topsoil in place. Jack shared with me the concepts of salamanders, sylphs, gnomes and the undi, spirits of the fire, the wind, the earth and the water. And regardless of what your beliefs are, great stories also hold great lessons if you listen. Through the chaos, hundreds of homes were lost and hundreds of thousands of acres burned. And as the chaos ends, structure reassembles itself, and we have a unique opportunity to have a profound influence on change. Ask not what your garden can do for you, but what you can do for your garden. That's really the theme for this segment as we plant a winter cover crop. We had gone months without any measurable rainfall and weeks with some of the driest, windiest weather on record, so we pre-irrigated our garden plot before planting. But the water was having a hard time penetrating that top hard layer of soil, so we used a broad fork to open up the ground, allowing both the water and air to enter more easily. When we were satisfied that this plot had had a good soaking, as well as the rest of the garden, we then turned to adding the magic, and we have to back up a little bit for this part. Actually, if we can go back to the night before I planted this cover crop, I mixed up a batch of Aaron Fried Pfeiffer's Biodynamic Field Spray. By adding a little rainwater or well water to this dry powder and mixing it up to a paste-like consistency, it's ready to go in about 24 hours. The field spray consists of enzymes and bacteria similar to the compost starter I used at the farm, but it also contains biodynamic preparations that stimulate plant growth and help the soil turn to humus. So we mix half of that field spray with some well water that I got at the farm. And we'll use the other half a little later on in this process. Farmer Jack is known for using his toilet brush to spread his field spray or compost starter, but I use some weeds that I've clipped from around my garden to spread my field spray. We walk around the garden spreading the field spray from all directions, but if you've ever seen how bacteria or fungi propagate, you'll know that in a conducive environment, it'll spread around the soil. Then it's back to our finished compost pile, where we'll fill a wheelbarrow full of compost, but we break up the clumps or clods by pouring the compost over an old weld wire gate door. In Masanobu's book One Straw Revolution, he strongly advocates the use of a cover crop to add fertility to the soil. And Alan Chadwick strongly recommended the use of compost. So by taking the best of what both of these teachers have shared with us, we create our own hybrid style. With much of the hard work now completed, this garden bed is ready for seed. The seed is a diversified mix of peas, vetch, oats, and beans. But before we cast the seeds onto the bed, we give them some tender love and care as well. This is some raw, whole, organic milk that I'm pouring on the seeds, to be followed by some organic molasses, sticky and sweet. We'll thoroughly mix up this concoction so that every seed is coated, and the molasses and milk will act as food for the secret ingredient in our next step. We're now ready to add the seed inoculant, which is a collection of rhizobacteria. And these bacteria stimulate the growth of nodules at the roots of these cover crops. And it's these root nodules that contain the nitrogen that when we turn this cover crop into the ground will become available for the next crop. Once the cover crop seeds with the molasses, milk, and the inoculant are all mixed together, it's ready to spread onto the ground. We start from the center of the garden bed and cast the seeds all around us, and eventually walk around the perimeter, ensuring that we evenly spread the seeds, and at the same time, it's a moving meditation to focus on this area. Our intentions for this cover crop go beyond just adding fertility to the soil. Its roots will prevent soil erosion and allow water to better penetrate into the ground. The cover crop will suppress weeds by blocking out the sunlight. It'll provide easy access to edible greens for some of the birds, reducing the pressure on our food crops. And when the flowers bloom, it'll attract pollinators. Finally, aesthetically, a cover crop is beautiful to look at. And for good measure, we sowed pea seeds around the perimeter of this plot. One of the first tips I learned from Jack when I met him was to oversow and undercover, meaning spread as much or more seeds than you think you're going to need, but then put a light layer of soil on top of those seeds. So here we spread a light final layer of compost, this being Jack's biodynamic blend. Although labor intensive, planting a cover crop this way does remind us that we can literally move the earth when we put our effort into it. But we're not doing this just for the exercise. Next spring, we'll probably plant some of our heaviest feeders in this quadrant, crops like corn or tomatoes, so it's best to add as much nutrients and fertility as possible during this winter rest. And so, to be thorough, it's at this point that we add the second half of the biodynamic field spray. Utilizing the powerful help of these microscopic organisms, fungi, enzymes, and bacteria, acknowledges that we have reverence for even the smallest living things. They interact with the earthworms, who interact with the lizards and the birds, and all of the creatures and plants are connected in both visible and invisible ways. Like a final blessing, we christen this garden bed for the day, and then we move on and spread the field spray amongst the rest of the garden. We also like to spread the field spray around the perimeters of the garden and throughout the entire property. We put some in a watering can and give it to our potted plants. And we spread some of this love to the fruit trees that line our driveway. And in autumn we feed these trees, ideally by dissolving 1 shovelful of compost into a 5-gallon bucket of water once a week. The citrus will fully mature in midwinter, and we look forward to some delicious fresh juice. The weeds that we use to spread the field spray are added to the compost heap, and any last magic juice is poured onto the compost as well. As the day winds down and our body is tired from all the hard work, we make notes in our garnet journal of exactly what we did and when. As we wind down this video, let's talk for a moment about healthy eating. Sometimes we try and buy the right thing, but when food comes from far away, the opportunity arises for weird things to happen along the way. And foods that we're often told are convenient are anything but. The advertisements that promote these products often run side by side with the same medications needed to treat illnesses that they create. When we consume dyes, preservatives, and sweeteners made from genetically modified crops sprayed with glyphosate, it's no surprise so many people take medications with disclaimers like, may cause dark or loose stools, explosive diarrhea, spontaneous combustion, leukemia, lymphoma, and in some cases death. But even in most convenience stores, healthier options are popping up with more and more appearing all the time. A good first step is to buy organic fruits and vegetables whenever available. But that's really just a first step, and with loosening USDA organic standards under the pressure of big agriculture's financial interests, your best bet is growing your own food. You can't beat eating straight from the garden. You can grow varieties which aren't commercially profitable because you provide the labor and eliminate transportation costs and time, delivering you the most fresh, flavorful, and nutrient-rich food possible. Masanobu calls us eating natural and local, and Alan Chadwick runs through a laundry list of medicinal properties for plants that you can grow. But you don't have to have a big front or backyard to grow food. This fall we helped our friends plant a raised bed that was on the side of their house and only got partial sunlight. But with the right soil and crops and giving your garden some TLC, they grew some wonderful vegetables for the family. And I'm sure their spring and summer and seasons to come will be that much better. No room for a raised bed? No problem. Even if you live in an apartment, your balcony or windowsill is a great place to grow potted herbs. We also encourage you to support local farmers, and one way is to subscribe to their Farm Box or CSA, Community Supported Agriculture Program. For us, shopping at a farmer's market is like going on a treasure hunt, searching for culinary treats that appeal to our eyes, taste buds, and souls. Most small-scale organic farmers grow diversified crops and care about the stewardship of their land, since many live and raise their families there. Take advantage of the opportunity to talk to farmers and meet the people and learn the practices that put food on your table. Our food choices are a direct reflection of our values and ethics. Have the consciousness to make that connection and act upon it. One bite at a time, and one meal at a time, your food choices have the power to heal your body and the planet. We hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, please watch some of our other videos and show us some social media love by doing the friend, follow, like, and share thing to help us continue sharing the joy of growing food. Thanks for watching. We wish you much health and happiness.